Hello, I am Priscilla Jadala, and I am so excited to welcome you to Behind the Mask Eating Disorders Unveiled. And I am here with Bryan Bixler.
Hi.
And we are starting this series. We did our first, episode of just introducing his story, his experience with his battle through facing anorexia and fighting for treatment. And it went so well. We had so much to talk about. We decided, well, let's just turn this into a series of addressing different topics, different issues related to eating disorders. So I'm excited to be doing this with you.
And thanks for having me back.
Of course.
I think kind of the idea of exploring eating disorders from the perspective of those who've lived eating disorders, the recovery process, what it's like, taking different aspects of, bringing people in. And So lots of potential here.
Yeah, and I think the great thing is I don't think anything's really been done as far as, exploring all different varieties of what goes on, not only with different types of eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, binge purge, like those types of orthorexia, which I know is kind of becoming heightened in the community, but also addressing, families, the loved ones, hearing the recovery stories and the stories of hope. I think that it's so exciting to be able to offer this.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think we have great thing forming here.
Yeah, so I know today we're going to really talk about and focus on the subject of families and loved ones who have someone struggling with an eating disorder. And I know you do a lot of work with the families. So kind of tell me and everyone kind of your experience working with families and what you've really noticed, how you go about it.
Okay.
From there.
As I do with most people that I work with, I come from my own experience initially, and how I went through it, what worked with me, what didn't work with me. And when I work with families, the first thing I put out there is rule number one: you're not going to understand this disease. It's illogical, makes no sense. And I think that's where families really run into a wall. They want to understand why, how do we fix it? So that's kind of the ground rules. And then we go from that to trying to move forward. How can we be supportive for the person or loved one going through the experience? And in my instance, most of my interaction with my family was somewhat like a pendulum between unconditional support to tough love. Initially, my family confronted me. They saw a lot of the signs, and I was in a denial at that point. Then once they broke through that denial, and I first, as I mentioned in the last episode, my first experience in treatment was a result of my family forcing me to be there. It was very unsuccessful. And not the best way to enter a treatment program. So therein lies a dilemma. When we see issues with our loved one, do we force them into going? I think a lot of families are, torn between what to do.
Yeah, and a lot of what I've noticed with clients and stories that I've heard is so many times, the families, friends notice the physical symptoms. That's kind of when, or maybe odd behaviors around food. And initially that's what's addressed is you're sick, you look sick, you're going to die, and this is weird. And there's no a lot of talk about, well, why are you doing this? When did this start? What are you feeling? And I think that's where the miscommunication is about trying to understand. The families try to understand, why are you doing this to your body? And the person who's suffering is saying it's so much more than just me wanting to do something negative to myself.
Right. I think they feel misunderstood or not understood at all. And the difficulty is the family at that stage, when they're seeing early signs, as with my case, the individual is in denial. And they're running against that denial, and as a result, they tend to react with anger.
Exactly.
And with me, it was a very, very long process. And like I said, I experienced a whole range of unconditional support where my family was behind me, to periods where we didn't speak at all for like 2 years. The tough love approach really never worked for me. And so when I interact with families, I really stress that this is a serious disease. It's not a matter of choice. I think most of the people that I speak with, most of the patients dealing with an eating disorder, that's where their frustration comes, because their family thinks they're choosing to do it and they simply need to stop. I interacted with my family for about 10 years in the disease, and they, up until the point that I finally got the help I did through the Dr. Oz show, most of the time they felt I was making a decision, poor decisions, bad choices. In fact, for many, many years I heard, you're intelligent, you're strong, you can do this, all these types of motivation to simply change what I was doing.
Yeah, and that's, what a lot of I see is that actually for a lot of people, and I don't know if this is the case for you, I think it feeds into the anger or kind of the rebellion side of the stance of which, I see so many people, and I try to explain to families that if they feel attacked, like they're being attacked or the eating disorder is being threatened, the eating disorder fights. It fights to hold on to whoever is suffering from it. And that's why I've seen and witnessed so much anger, and it's almost like at that point, I'm going to show you, like in those early stages, that's what I've seen in treatment centers when they're in that denial stage, is so much anger to protect it.
That's very, very true. I mean, even when someone's fully committed to treatment, that eating disorder is going to fight back. And that's what I also express to families that are searching for treatment for someone, or if they don't do well or they relapse, that's the disease. They had a really interesting approach when I went through the process. They called it red list, green list, and they had the families create a list of all the things they see in the individual in the disease. And this was the red list. And then all the qualities they see in the individual or their loved one. And then they had the person come in and see those. And that's a really tough process. But then you can separate the disease and the behaviors from the person and the qualities of the person. And that's what you try to really focus on, is the fact that this is a disease. With me, like I said, my family never really understood that I wasn't choosing to do this.
Yeah.
I still remember one instance. Actually, the one thing I should stress here, this is a very progressive disease. Yes. Over time, it will get worse. So with me, when the medical complications became more extreme, for example, I had a severe lung infection for almost 2 years. I was hospitalized for about 10 days in isolation. They thought I had tuberculosis. They didn't know what was going on. I was on 4 different heavy medications, and I remember the day I left there, my mother said, "Well, are you going to start taking care of yourself now?" As if because of this, I could simply change.
Yes. And, I think that's so much of why awareness and education for families and support is so needed. I got, a letter today, and I've gotten a couple, since I started my blog, and writing about these things from families, a lot from families saying, I have a daughter, I have a son who, it started out slow, but we didn't know what to look for. We didn't even know how severe this disease could get. And now it's taking over, and we don't know what to do. And treatment centers, oftentimes, because they are in line with insurance, there's a lot of stuff that families don't know, and so they don't know the right ways. They don't know the right resources.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I think it's so great we're talking about this, and I'm so happy that you have that experience that you share.
Actually, that's a big part of my journey, is the fact that we tried to get treatment for a good 7-8 years. And one of the greatest difficulties is those people without insurance. What do we do? In fact, this morning I just had a young man message me on Facebook that, his family's paid out of pocket for the last 4 treatment programs. He's back in that place where he's really sick. He can't change what he's doing. He's scared for his life, and the family wants to support him, but they won't support him in the eating disorder.
Yeah.
They feel like they're exhausted. And I understand, with my family, they were watching me die over all these years, and I can't even imagine being in that position. I've gone through experiences with people that I really care about and watching them in the disease, and that's given me a different perspective, sort of like full circle, what my family was experiencing. So it's a really tough process, and the entire family needs to be involved. And I don't think it was until, most programs do have what they call a family week to help them understand. And I don't think it was till that family week, 12 years into the disease, that my family finally said, "Wow, you weren't choosing to do this." And as severely sick as I was, up until that point, they really thought, if they were, the tough love approach and he was going to hit bottom, that he'd really pull out of it somehow. The reality is, had I not got outside help, there's a pretty good chance I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So the dilemma is, with let's say, for example, this young man that messaged me,
Yeah.
their family has the means to support him. Now, do they make a choice and say, okay, we're going to support you unconditionally? Or do they stand back and possibly lose their child? And I come from the perspective where tough love did not work with me. Once you're in that powerless stage, it's really difficult to pull out of it by yourself.
Yeah. And and that's what's so important is also for anyone who is struggling with their eating disorder and they feel rejected and not understood, and even I'm sure posing the question of, well, if they have the means to help me and they're refusing to help me, they don't love me, they don't care, they're willing to watch me die. And then that feeds into the almost hopelessness and defeat to even want to try and fight. And I try to get clients and the people I see, and like you said, to really try to understand the other side too, because I think for a lot of families, they're told tough love, they try, so hard to fight, they feel defeated, and so sometimes they disconnect. It's almost easier to throw your hands up and walk away and say, I don't even know what to do anymore, I'm tired and I can't fight. So for you, when you kind of saw that other side of seeing people struggle, and was there frustration? What feelings were you feeling that you were kind of shocked by, like, okay, now I understand maybe my family's perspective?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, there brings up a lot when your family,
Yeah.
your family has the means to support you. They've supported you in the past. It was unsuccessful. And you can't blame them for not, especially in my own instance, I'm an adult. My family doesn't have the responsibility to take care of me anymore. But there's a lot of emotion around, wow, this is their son. Are they putting a monetary value on my life? But there's a thin line between what they call enabling someone and supporting them unconditionally. And I think this disease differs a great deal from, say, drugs or alcohol.
Yes.
I was working with a family that was somewhat supportive of the young woman, their daughter, and they were coming around to really understanding the disease and trying to support them. And then they did a family week with a program that mixed different disorders. There was Al-Anon along. And they kind of finished the week with the tough love. Okay, we're going to set our boundaries. We're going to protect ourselves, which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
But again, in this disease, hitting bottom is not a result of, making poor decisions. It's the progression of the disease, and they're not going to pull out of it by themselves. So it's really a tough way to, figure out how to approach it. Again, I understand the pain of watching a loved one die, or even be concerned that they're going down that road. And gosh, my family dealt with it for 15, 20 years. I can't even imagine going through that themselves. And also being in the position of, living the disease, that's a nightmare in itself.
Yeah.
So that comes full circle back to this really is a family disease, and it takes a family approach. As far as insurance and, when insurance is not available, how to get through that, there are resources out there that help people guide through the process.
Yeah.
But I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yes, it's crazy or mind-boggling how, I don't even know or if any movement has been made. Not a lot of treatment is covered. I know recently, anorexia has become more covered, but it's only for such a short period of time. And it's so based on kind of the statistics they see from, medical charts and stuff like that, and not based on the actual treatment experience per se. And that's what's very frustrating from a clinical standpoint, is to be in these treatment centers, having worked in them, and to see patients or clients in front of me and know you are not ready to go home. You are still very sick, but insurance has cleared you.
Right.
And then that's also the dilemma with families I see is they feel defeated by insurance and they don't even know where to proceed. And a lot of times if they don't have the means, they don't even know where to go for help. And so that's what's kind of motivated me, and what I really liked when speaking with you, that you do talk to families, is to give families, that sense of encouragement to fight for the right to have support groups, to have resources, to have programs dedicated for the families, I think.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a really important point that oftentimes families see the signs, maybe their weight drops or they see strange behaviors. But in reality, the measure of seriousness of the disease is not about the physical appearance.
Not at all.
I worked with a couple of people actually on the Dr. Oz show in intervention. Two of the women were of normal weight, and they didn't see themselves as anorexic, but they had anorexic mindsets. And as I said, this is a progressive disease. It will go the course, and eventually it takes everything you value in life.
Yeah.
And again, as you mentioned, as far as my own experience and seeing the correlation of what is actually successful for people, like I said previously, there's a great deal of relapse in this, and that's primarily to the fact that insurance companies do, and they're, I guess in their strange business sense, they believe that, by cutting someone off sooner, they're going to save money. But the reality is they relapse, they go back into treatment.
Yes.
It happens over and over. And again, in this process, the families lose hope. Mm-hmm. They're like, and in fact, when I fought, I was in 2 different court appeals. And I believe at the second court appeal, they were telling me, well, what's the point? You've been in treatment before. Mm-hmm. Why is this going to be different? Why should we pay for it? And at that point, you're in a position where you have to justify why you should be supported to save your life. And it's absolutely a horrible position to be in.
Well, I can't imagine being put in that spot. It's almost like, screaming, be finally you knowing you're ready. This is different. You're committed. But when no one believes you, it's like the boy who cried wolf almost, where, you've said, I'll do it. And then, because the disease is so strong and so powerful, relapse happens. And so it's almost like when you're really, truly ready to really fight it with everything you have, when everyone says, what's different? I can't imagine being put in that position, having to say, how do I prove to you that this is different? What can I do to show you that my mind and my mindset has changed?
I think it's for me, I was in a place where I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything. I simply could not change what I was doing. Yeah. It was very visible. I was in and out of the hospital. But again, even with being in a position like that, the second time I went into treatment, when my family finally stepped up and said, we're going to help you again, I couldn't guarantee them what would happen. I had no idea whether or not I could really do it. Yeah. So to say, I will try my hardest, but I didn't want any expectations because I know how difficult it was to fight the disease the first time. I think the take-home message I give to everybody I work with, and in particular with people that are going through the process of fighting the disease is, the old adage, never, never give up. Yeah. Because this is a relentless disease. But there is a lot of hope that people can recover.
And I think that's the power of just your story and so many stories that are out there of the people who do recover, because, it could be 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, but it's possible. It's so possible. And, I guess I want to touch on really, for, I think, education and the awareness that maybe families, coaches, teachers, friends, any kind of influence they should have about the words they say, the messages they send. Because so much of what I see is, sometimes there are the family dynamics that play into kind of the mindset, the self-esteem, the self-worth that can lead up to wanting to fix body image that leads to the disorder. But a lot of times it's through sports, through coaches, something a teacher said, something a friend said. What kind of awareness do you think families and the kind of community around, I guess, even children growing up needs to be kind of addressed and out there?
I think that's very, very important. In fact, it really starts with the family because there's a lot of evidence it's a genetically based disease, and it is passed on from generation to generation. So there's a pretty good chance that one of the parents have an eating disorder or symptoms of an eating disorder. And I can say that I've seen it repeatedly where one of the parents has strange eating patterns or such, and the child picks those up in the early phases of when they're developing their choices. And oftentimes the parent is in denial about their own issues, and they're trying to seek support for their child or their loved one. And it's difficult to say, well, they need help, and then not to be able to look at themselves.
Yeah, it actually surprised me so much when I was working in the treatment centers that I did, how many of the parents were suffering from an eating disorder or disordered eating and bringing their child in, and their child was fully aware, or their young adult, whatever age, was fully aware that their parent had disordered eating, was in the disease, and then they're brought to get help and to fix their issue.
It's predominantly what you see in most families, when in a typical intervention where you bring a loved one in, the identified loved one, the surrounding family members are encouraged to talk about what's going on with them, where they're at, and it's predominantly true that they will have something going on, whether it's overeating, something that they cope in a different manner.
Even some OCD, obsessive compulsive behaviors, and even I think some perfectionistic behaviors. I think just those characteristics alone can kind of put a different mindset into the child who's observing the parent.
Right. When I look back at my own childhood, I really never thought I had any body image issues. That's typically I was labeled atypical anorexic, by the way, which, given the diversity of eating disorders, I don't think an atypical anorexic actually exists. But I didn't have the body dysmorphia. I didn't pursue changing my body shape or size. Mine was about other issues.
Yeah.
They call it male pattern anorexia, where it was about sports, performance, and such. But I do remember growing up in a household where my father was really on my sister about her weight all the time. Not only that, I always heard comments about fat people in the Midwest, a lot of comments about body image, about body size. And I think in a way that fed into my own issues. I don't know, in some way, but I do see it in other families as well. Yes. I know one woman who was put on a diet when she was 12. So again, to start at the family, to really look at the family issues, it's not there for the purpose of blaming someone in the family.
Not at all.
I know my family, when they came into Family Week, they were afraid, okay, what do we do? Am I going to blame them? And my goal was to really just get it out there that I really wasn't choosing to do this. I need the support I need. And let's explore what really happened. And they did, they were a part of the issues, but not to blame, because blame got me nowhere, got them nowhere. I know they felt a huge amount of guilt to see me where I was. They take responsibility for where I was in my life.
Yeah.
So I think that's another issue that comes into when you're dealing with families is what are the family members going through? And as you said, they need to seek support for themselves.
Yeah, and I think, it's so hard because, I don't want it to ever seem like, and a lot of what is associated with even therapy in general or going to therapy is it's automatically going to be blamed on the family. And, that's not the case. And that's why I think bringing awareness and education to families, even early, even if the eating disorder is not an issue, just in parenting alone of your child or your kids will pick up on every little thing. And so to be mindful of even how you eat and the things that you say and the comments you make really have such impact.
Right.
And also, not even that, I know a lot of clients and people in treatment centers, they come in, they have amazing families, amazing support, but the trigger was of something a friend said, something a coach said, a dance teacher, an educator, so many different other outside sources just beyond the family. So I think, like you said, starting with the family, but also educating the outside sources in the community. I think that's so vital too, because they don't probably realize that what they say or how they are or how they even, with sports guidelines, it could affect the mentality of so many people.
I totally agree. In fact, when I look at where mine started, the seeds of my eating disorder were in my sports.
Exactly.
And if coaches were aware and to look for signs, maybe have educational components to their sports programs about eating disorders, I think that would go a huge way in preventive measures, and helping people be aware of these kind of things. And I think education really is a powerful tool to help people with this disease.
Are you aware? Because, I'm not aware, besides, in treatment facilities and centers, they have the family groups, the family weeks, family sessions. But outside of that, are you aware of any or know of any even support or support groups or recovery groups for the families or the loved ones, the spouses, the boyfriends, the girlfriends, the friends?
Right. Well, when you look at chemical dependency, they usually say Al-Anon.
Yes.
Again, from my perspective, I think Al-Anon can be detrimental to people with eating disorders. They tend to talk about boundaries, let your loved one deal with theirs, protect yourself. And it's more along the lines of tough love. But I think there are meetings out there, ANAD, several different types of community support groups, OA, which can be, in a way, problematic. I say hesitantly with OA because oftentimes that's a program based on restriction. But I think primarily would be seeking support, through a therapist and such. Unfortunately, there are not many programs in Orange County in this area. There are more in other areas, but if you go online, the eating disorders websites, NEDA's a good source for finding resources and such. But I think there's a really strong need for, like you said, education in schools. I do know that the program or the treatment center that I've worked with, and as well as the treatment center I was an alumni of, they now have a program where they go out to schools and they speak to school groups But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done.
And, that's why, I'm actually trying to start and advocate to go to schools and to speak and educate just actually families, having
Right.
parents, because I think that's so important. And also, even just talking about it here, and there's so many layers to it, just to give the family some type of hope and to know that, ask questions, find, through us or through any other resources, ask the questions and try to really fight for those answers, because and ask to be heard. I think that there needs to be community created, specifically maybe for the families to help guide them through, because I know it's such a sensitive disease. It's such a powerful disease. And when it takes hold of your child, your husband, your wife, your loved ones, you never know what is the right thing to say, what is not the right thing to say.
Right.
Anything can set off the triggers. And so it's so important to talk and to figure it out and to get that support and help. And
I think that's one of the greatest frustrations with families is they say, well, what do we say? How do we support them? Once they're on board to support, oftentimes they try to support them and it's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And when I work with the individual, I say, your family might not be able to support you in the way they know how. They're doing what they know best, but they love you, they care about you. But I think the bottom line when you're dealing with families is to really stress this is a disease, it's not a choice. I think I often use the analogy, and I did this with the pro-anacytes as well. I often compare this to cancer. Say a family member got cancer. How would you treat them? What would you do? How would you approach it? And this is a disease. And I think a lot of the frustration comes from the fact that families just don't understand that.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what I initially said. You're not going to understand it, but it is a powerful disease that they're trapped in.
Yeah. I was at a treatment center, and they had a speaker, amazing speaker, and one thing that she said that really stuck with me, which kind of goes with what you said, is delete the need to understand.
Right.
Delete it from your mindset, your repertoire, in your brain. Delete any need to understand on both sides. I think the person suffering, really wants to get their families to understand. They want to feel understood. They want their family members or loved ones to get it and to see what they're going through. But on both ends to know, this is such a complex disease. And you delete the need to understand. And I think that can set so many people free, because then you can just focus on, okay, I may not understand it, but now what can I do to help?
Exactly. And that's why I go back to the ground rule that I set. I'm a scientist. That's my background and my training. I'm all about understanding things. I woke up every morning trying to figure this out myself. I didn't understand it. My family would reinforce that. They'd say, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? That would reinforce my shame that I couldn't beat this, I couldn't change. Then I'd think, well, everybody else thinks I should be able to change, so why can't I change? It's a terrible cycle to be stuck in. And again, having the empathy, the compassion, I call it unconditional love. Again, it's a fine line between enabling someone and being unconditionally supportive of them. I've worked with several different families where the family members were saying, oh, we're done. We're not going to do it anymore. And then after a discussion, they said, okay, we're gonna support them in treatment again, and it's been successful. And that really is the key. You just keep doing it until it actually works. I understand as far as financial, it's incredibly expensive to go to treatment. But how much money do you put on a lab? What's the price of a life?
Yes. And, even for someone in your situation, you had to fight to get treatment. You were denied through the legal systems, but something like the Dr. Oz show came because you were vocal, because you didn't give up, and you were given that opportunity. And, not even saying everyone, not everyone will have that opportunity, but if you fight, who knows? There's so many sources out there.
Right.
There's Project Heal. There's, different nonprofits that are trying to raise funds to send people to treatment, trying to do what they can in the community to help. Even by doing this series that we'll be doing, I'm hoping, to be able to provide that hope for someone to keep fighting. I think that's so vital.
It's key. And again, back to never give up. And I look back at different parts in my recovery or my attempt at recovery, and I was at such dark periods that I thought I really had a terminal illness. And I thought, okay, there's no one out there going to help me. Why should I even fight? And the key is to keep continuing to fight, because I had very, very little hope, and I'm now in a place where I never imagined I could be.
So I know you were saying that you met, or a young gentleman or a gentleman had written you through Facebook and said, he was at that point where he wants help, his family won't help him. What advice did you, lasting advice did you give him, or words of hope or wisdom did you give him?
Well, I don't have a lot of resources. I do have a lot of people come to me. They say, I don't have insurance. How do I get help? You know, do you know places? Can you call Dr. Oz? I mean, people approach me about that,
Yeah.
like I have a connection with Dr. Oz or something.
Call them, Brandon.
I wish I could. I mean,
Yeah.
it breaks my heart to not be able to support them in that way. What I offered was that I'd be willing to talk to the family and help them to understand. And that's coming from, I use my story. I say, Google my name. You can see my whole story. You can see where this disease leads. And with me, there's very visual images of how sick people can get with this. And they, in fact, will die. And with that education, coupled with helping them understand that they need to support the person, I try to influence it so that the family will change their minds about it.
Yeah.
You know, do you want your second home or do you want your son? You know, there's making that kind of a decision. I mean, it's a horrible position to be in, but for the family to give up on the loved one, that's heartbreaking.
Yes.
And I know he was in a really tough situation. So essentially what I did is I said, I'd be willing to talk to your parents.
Yes. And, sometimes just that communication, somebody else coming out from the outside saying, I went through it, I've been through it, I'm still here, I faced it, and I'm recovered, and now I'm helping, and I'm here
Right.
today to talk to you. Who knows, that could be all they need to hear to reassure them to be like, okay, then it is possible. Because I think it's important for families to know, because the relapse rate is so high, that recovery is so possible. And so many people get to that point.
I think they get to that point because, they get to the point of exhaustion. They're just so fatigued. You know, if their loved one relapses multiple times.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to, why is this going to be different? Why should we do this? And I guess they believe that at some point the loved one will snap out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't snap out of it. It's not a matter of snapping. It's like saying, okay, when are you going to take care of yourself? Like if you have cancer, suddenly you're going to wake up one day and say, okay, I think I'm going to stop doing this because I know I'm going to die.
Yeah.
For me, it was a very, very obvious thing. I had two options. I could eat and live, or I could continue what I was doing and probably die. And I could never choose the option that would enable me to live.
Mm-hmm.
That powerlessness, and that's what I try to convey to the families. They need support. They need outside support. They can't do it on their own. And they need that unconditional love.
And, and families need support. And so, I hope this was helpful to any families who have questions. And, we're going to be creating, a Facebook page. So hopefully, anybody out there who watches this, if you have questions, if you have, anybody who's struggling, if you're a family member of someone who's struggling, you have questions or you want us to address anything, that's what we are hoping that this series can provide is, at least from our perspectives, we don't have, the number one answer of
Right.
to cure everything, but we have two different perspectives, and we're trying our best, to help. And I think
I don't think there's a one answer for anybody.
Yeah,
Everybody's
there's
in a little different situation, but we're all on the same page. We want someone to recover.
Yeah.
So I think it's key that we just offer the support and try to support people as much as we can.
Yes. And I'm very excited about being able to do this.
I am too. This should be a great opportunity.
Yes. So thank you so much for, again, being here. And, you'll be here all the time now with me. And we'll be talking about so many different topics regarding eating disorders and body image. And I'm just very excited to be able to have this tool